this evening's episode of Talks at New Haven. I'm one of your hosts, Josh Robinson, and joining me today, as always, is my co-host,
Alton Booth.
And on today's episode, Alton and I are going to be discussing Genesis chapter 8, verses 6 through 19. We're going to be talking about the waters beginning to subside, the animals coming out of the ark, how this relates to the new creation, how how Noah is being depicted as a new Adam, and what that means for us in some ways. And so should be an interesting episode. Alton, how are you doing today, pal?
Doing pretty good. We had a good time at church this morning. Didn't have a lot of people today. It's a holiday weekend. We had some people sick, so our numbers were low. But that just meant we got to be creative. You got to break out the whiteboard to draw something. I'm not sure what it was, but you drew it.
It was.
It was there.
It was there.
People took pictures of it. It's probably going to take them the rest of the week to decipher what they took pictures of, but they took pictures of it.
They did. I saw people pulling phones out, taking pictures all over the place this morning. And I was like, either you guys are looking at this to try to decode what I'm writing, or you're just taking it home to make fun of me. So
probably both.
Probably
both.
Yeah. So it was a good time though. In all seriousness, it was. I like it whenever I feel like that's. If you ask me what my teaching style is, I feel like this morning that's a lot. Like, I feel very uncomfortable just sitting up there and not moving whenever I preach in the morning. So, like, being able to sit in front of people, draw on the board, ask questions, that's much more my actual teaching style. So it was a good time for me too. So, but to get us started today, I'll read the text for us, and we're going to be in Genesis chapter 8, starting in verse 6. And we'll go to verse 19, just before God makes the covenant with Noah. We'll look at that a little bit more next week. But the Lord says through Moses this: At the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made, and he sent forth a raven. It went to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth. Then he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters had subsided from the face of the ground. But the dove found no place to set her foot. And she returned to him on the ark, for the waters were still on the face of the whole earth. So he put out his hand, and he took her and brought her into the ark with him. He waited another 7 days, and again he sent forth the dove out of the ark. And the dove came back to him in the evening, and behold, in her mouth was a freshly plucked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the waters had subsided from the earth. Then he waited another 7 days, and he sent forth the dove, and she did not return to him any more. In the 601st year, in the first month, of the first day of the month, the waters were dried from off the face of the earth. And Noah removed the covering for the ark, and he looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. In the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth had dried out. Then God said to Noah, Go out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing that is with you of all flesh, birds and animals, and every creeping thing that creep on the earth, that they may swarm on the earth, and be fruitful, and multiply on the earth. So Noah went out, and his sons and his sons' wives with him. Every beast, every creeping thing, and every bird, everything that moves on the earth, went out by families from the ark. So that's our passage for this evening. So Alton, we'll just go ahead and just take it from verse 6, and we'll work our way down to verse 19.
Yeah, so we'll start there in verse 6. So in verse 6, we see, At the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made and sent forth a raven. So Noah built the ark. After the rain is over, the first thing he does, he opens the window. It's no longer raining. He takes a raven, and he sends the raven out the window of the ark. And it says, it went to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth.
Yeah.
So we were talking just before we came on, and that raises kind of an odd question, is where did the raven go?
It's a good question. The text doesn't explicitly say so. I told you guys before, I told them, for those who are listening, I said, I guess it probably found a Nephilim somewhere floating in the water and just landed on there and just chilled out for a little while.
Yeah, it's just odd that he sent out the raven and it never came back.
And it doesn't say anything about it either. So really interesting though.
Right, and you do have the contrast there between the raven and the dove.
Yeah.
You have the dove, which is seen as the spirit, seen as clean, seen as pure in other instances. And now the raven, if you take those two birds and you look at them side by side, the raven's kind of opposite.
Yeah, it's kind of. I think it's a carrion feeder. I think that ravens are.
Right, and well, ravens, they're opposite in color. Yeah. Ravens are black, where doves are white. They are also more. Ravens are more scavenger than a dove would be. Yeah. So you have. I don't know that that's what Moses' point was here. Yeah. But you do have two very opposite birds there that are being sent out.
Yeah, there is a contrast there between darkness and light. It seems like, and so
then
it's interesting.
Then we get down to verse number 8, and he says, "Then he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters had subsided from the face of the ground." Mm-hmm. So at this point, the ark is kind of seated up on the mountains of Ararat. Mm-hmm. He can't really see anything because this is a huge boat. There's probably a lot of the boat underwater while it's floating. Probably. So it's kind of got beached on top of a mountain, but the water still hasn't come down enough that he can see the ground. Yep. So he sends out the dove to look for dry ground. And in verse 9 it says, "But the dove found no place to set her foot. And she returned to him to the ark, for the waters were still on the face of the whole earth." So the dove's gone around and can't find anywhere to land.
Yeah. Well, we talked about this a little bit before, and we said that we were going to... It was kind of foreshadowing what we'd talk about here today. But obviously this is also in reference to the Spirit as well.
Right.
We see in Genesis chapter 1 that whenever the world was tohu wabohu, it says in Hebrew, this rhyming phrase that's really fun to say. It says that water was over the face of the deep. Right. The dry land hadn't come out yet, and it says that the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Right. So we have the same thing going on here with this dove. Right. It's hovering over the waters because there's no place for its foot to land. We see later on that the dove gets used as a symbol for the Spirit in Jesus' baptism. Mm-hmm. So whenever Jesus is going into the waters, we see that this Holy Spirit in the form of a dove comes down and descends over the waters where he's at as well. So, so you can start to see just glimpses of the Trinity here in the text. So.
Right. So you can see the dove. Yep. Nowhere for it to land. So it comes back and says, "So he put out his hand and took her and brought her into the ark with him." Yep. So down to verse 10. "He waited another 7 days." So this is that number 7 we're seeing again.
Yeah, just coming back and coming back.
"And again he sent forth the dove out of the ark. Mm-hmm. And the dove came back to him in the evening, and behold, in her mouth was a freshly plucked olive leaf. Yeah. So Noah knew that the waters had subsided from the earth." So the dove goes out now and is out presumably all day, because it makes a point of saying that she came back in the evening. Yeah. And while she's out, she finds an olive leaf.
Yep. Garden language.
So there's a leaf there. Yep. Now, you can pluck the leaf from the very top of a tree. Yep. And the rest of the tree still be underwater.
That's right.
Which is why the dove plucked the leaf and brought it back instead of staying gone. Yep. And we're going to see that now in verse 12, that he waited another 7 days. Yep. So we see the 7 come again. Yep. "And he sent forth the dove, and she did not return to him anymore."
Yep. So she found a new home. She didn't come back to Noah because the waters had subsided.
Right. The waters were low enough that she had somewhere to go now.
That's right. Yep.
So now we're going to get into kind of a shift in focus here in verse number 13. And this is something we talked about a little bit before we came on, and we're going to focus here a little bit. Yep. In verse 13, it says, "In the 601st year, in the first month, the first day of the month, the waters were dried from off the earth." So we'll stop right there. The 601st year, the first month, the first day of the month. Yeah. It would be a really weird coincidence if they came out of the ark on New Year's Day.
Yeah, right.
If the water was gone on New Year's Day, that'd be a really weird coincidence. Yeah. And as we've talked about with Scripture, there's not really coincidences.
No, everything has meaning to it. And so one of the theories that I've heard about this, and it kind of comes from Mike Heiser and from others, but he talks about that, what's going on here is this is a place that the Hebrews are going to derive a calendar from. And so what they're doing is you have a new creation now. Right? The waters have finally subsided. So now you're living in a new world. Right? So it makes sense to describe this as being in the first day of the first month on the 601st year of Noah's life, right? So you kind of have this blank slate, this fresh beginning, and he does some other connection points between this and Jesus' birth later on, but basically what's thought here is this is where Moses is going to start the work of kind of crafting a Hebrew calendar.
Right, and it's also interesting that it's the 601st year.
That's
because
right.
you'd think, hey, if we're going to start the calendar here, let's make it the first year, right?
Yep.
Well, what did we see back in chapter 7? That the flood came when Noah was 600 years old.
Yeah.
Now, if we take the days that it talks about, because it gives us the date that the rain started, it gives us the dates for how long everything lasted, that's going to take us from the time that the rain started until here, the 601st year.
Yep.
So, kind of what we're seeing, year 1 is the year that Noah was born.
Yeah.
So, if what Heiser's saying is correct, and this is the way that Moses crafted the entire Hebrew calendar, the entire calendar is based off of the life of Noah.
I was going to say based off the life of Noah. That would be right.
Which would kind of give some weight to the thought that Noah is a new Adam.
That's right. That's exactly right. So it's it's very likely that Noah and Israel doesn't exist yet.
Right.
It's not going to exist until later on. Now Moses is writing it at a point when Israel does exist. Right. They've come out of the wilderness now at this point. That whole thing, or they're in the wilderness at this point. Whenever he would have been writing Genesis. But it does give weight to that view that Moses, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, is viewing him as a new Adam. And obviously there is no Hebrew culture or anything like that to preserve a calendar during Noah's day. You know what I mean? Nothing like that. So it would make sense that as a culture maker, he is now using this as a jumping off point to tell time by. Right, they're going to tell it by the patriarch Noah, and according to his life. So
right, and I was just looking back at the end of chapter 5. Even you have Lamech, Noah's father, who gave birth to Noah. Well, didn't necessarily give birth to Noah; that would have been Noah's mother. But he fathered Noah, and he said that out of the ground that the Lord has cursed. This one shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. So Noah is someone who was so important to them that's the meaning his name had.
That's right.
The one that would bring us relief. If you're going to start your calendar and you're going to start keeping time at one point, what better point than the birth of the one who is going to bring you relief from the curse that you had struggled against?
Yeah, that's right. That's good. And you also see here too this type of garden imagery again, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more. Garden imagery and creation imagery. We're going to talk about it whenever we hit 13 through 19, but we see it here just above the 600th year. In verse 11, we see that the dove plucks an olive leaf, which would go to an olive tree. Whenever you think trees, that should immediately take your mind back to the garden,
right?
That kind of thing. So again, just more and more little clues that there is a new creation here, right? And then you've got the whole 7-day pattern that keeps getting repeated. 7 days of creation, and there's going to be quite a bit more that's going to make it even more explicit on into 13 and to 19. But yeah. So that I think that theory it's got some weight to it. I think.
Yep. So finishing up verse 13, it says, "And Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry." Yeah. So the dove is gone. Now we're looking around, and the ground is dry. So in the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth had dried out. So the ground was dry, but now we have to wait almost another 2 months for the earth to dry out enough for them to leave the ark.
Because mud's terrible.
Right. When it's rained that much,
Yeah.
I can only imagine how bad the mud would be and how soft the ground would be. You're going to have animals coming out of the ark and breaking legs because they're stepping in wet spots. Okay, you're going to have that kind of thing. So they waited a little bit before they came out.
Yeah.
Now, we get down to verse 15. It says, Then God said to Noah, so very short verse. Then God said to Noah, He says, Go out from the ark, you and your wife and your sons wives.
Yeah.
So, just like we looked at in, back in chapter 7,
Yeah.
that when they went into the ark, God closed the door behind them.
Yep, that's right.
They didn't choose to stay in the ark this long waiting on the ground to dry.
Maybe.
They didn't close the door. They weren't able to open the door.
Yeah.
They had to wait until God said, "Go out of the ark."
Yeah.
So
that's really good. Really good point.
they were waiting until God told them to leave the ark. So now God's opened the door. God's let them out.
Yeah.
Verse 17 it says, and this is where it's going to start getting a little more interesting and a little more of the creation and garden language. It says, "Bring out with you every living thing that is with you, of all flesh, birds and animals and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, that they may swarm on the earth." And then what does he say about those creeping things and all of those things?
That they would swarm on the earth and that they would be fruitful and multiply on the earth.
Right.
Right.
So the beasts that have been kept on the ark, all the animals that were carried through the flood and brought to the other side, like we talked about a little bit last week, being on the ark was not enough to save them.
Yeah.
They weren't saved until the ark was on solid ground and the water was gone and they could come back out. Yeah. So all of those things that have been saved are now given the same command that was given back in the garden in Genesis 1.
That's exactly right. And so what we also see here is you have, the way that God creates the earth is he creates heavens above, earth below, waters beneath the earth, first 3 days of creation. Then in the parallel days, you have God fills the heavens with the birds. He fills the earth with the creeping things, right? And then you've also got, he fills, he's got that, and then he also fills it with the humans, and then you've got the whole fish, the water thing, that kind of thing. And you've got that kind of recapitulated is the word here. So what you've got is it explicitly mentions these animals in the same type of order in some ways as it does in the creation week. So bring out with you every living creature that is with you of all flesh, the birds and the animals and everything that creeps on the earth, right? And why? It says, so that they may swarm on the earth and be fruitful and multiply. Now, here's what I said to our congregation this morning. The phrase, be fruitful and multiply, that ought to grab your attention. The reason why is because this is creation and garden language, right? So the first place that we come across that phrase, be fruitful and multiply, is in Genesis 1:22. And there, on the fifth day of creation, after God creates the beasts of the field, he says that they should be fruitful and multiply, right? Then we see it again in Genesis 1:28 on the sixth day of creation when God makes the man and the woman. And God repeats the same phrase to them. He says to them, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, have dominion over it.
Yep.
Right? And so, again, the reason... So this goes to show a couple things. Obviously, it goes to prove what we've been saying from the beginning in this Noah story. There is a new creation, right? There's this new creation, but it also goes to show that God has not done away with his plans to fill the earth, right? With this whole garden city, this garden temple thing that he has always wanted from the beginning. Now, it also... I'm not the only person who said that. John Selhammer, he in his book, it's called The Pentateuch as Narrative. Selhammer was a major person who pointed out a lot of the literary design and design pattern and stuff like that in the scriptures. He says it this way. He says, the description, though condensed, follows closely the pattern in Genesis chapter 1. The picture given is that of a return to the world of creation in the beginning. And then he says the restoration of God's creation was founded on the establishment of a covenant. So he's also drawing notice to the covenant, which we've not got to yet.
Right, we'll get to that next week.
Yeah, but he's saying that in the same way that you had creation founded upon the covenant with Noah, or with Adam, right? God gives him, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, don't eat these trees, you can eat these trees, right? He's saying that the same thing is happening here with Noah. You have another new creation, a return to the world as in the beginning, and it's also founded upon a covenant. Now, also, what's doing here too is it's foreshadowing that Noah is a new Adam, right? So the same phrase that's used right here in verse 17, he says, "Be fruitful, multiply on the earth to the animals."
Mm-hmm.
Okay, God says that to the animals in day 5.
Right.
But God also repeats that to the man and to the woman in day 6.
Mm-hmm.
God's going to do the same thing, same exact pattern in 9:1.
Right.
So I think it's
9:1.
Yeah, 9:1. God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, upon every bird of the heavens, upon everything that creeps on the ground, all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be your food for you. As I give you the green plants, I give you everything. But you shall not eat the flesh of the life, because there's the blood." You know, that whole thing. But basically what's going on is it's following, like Sailhammer says, it's a condensed version, but it's following the exact same pattern. You've got beasts of the field, you've got the birds of the air, and then be fruitful and multiply. Then you've got the new humans and the new creation, right? Adam is a new Noah is a new Adam upon a new holy mountain on Ararat with a tree or an ark made of trees on the top, just like you would have had the tree of life. And you've got all this stuff repeating. It's recapitulation. It's the same story being played over again.
Right.
So.
And just kind of touching back on your statement that we also see here that God is not abandoning his plan.
That's right.
Right? He's not abandoning his plan to see the earth taken back to paradise.
Yeah.
Basically, to see his kingdom come on earth. We can go back and look again at Genesis 8:1, right?
Yeah.
How did that verse start? Yeah. But God remembered Noah.
Yeah.
So we can look back at that verse and we can see that that's why God remembered Noah.
Yep.
Because it was through Noah that his plan for restoration of the earth was going to take place.
That's right.
The return to the garden was going to come through Noah.
Yeah.
Both in the relatively soon time for them.
Yeah.
Like immediately after they get off the boat, they have a return to the garden.
Yeah.
But then the eternal return to the garden is also going to come through Noah.
That's right. Yeah, through his lineage, rest is going to come to the land. So.
Yeah. So we finished up there in verse 17, and we see God telling the animals to be fruitful and multiply. And then we get to verse 18. It says, "So Noah went out, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him. Every beast, every creeping thing, and every bird, everything that moves on the earth, went out by families from the ark."
Yeah.
So we see right here this wrapping up, leaving the ark, going basically in the opposite order, in a reverse order of how they entered the ark. We see Noah and his family coming out, and then the animals coming out by family. Just like before, the animals all went in by family, and then Noah and his family went in last.
It's basically the back end of a chiasm.
Right.
It's basically like on the one side, in like chapter 6 or 7, you've got, like you're saying, they're all coming in this order, and now we've hit the middle part of the chiasm, which is probably around God remembers Noah, and then now we're coming down the back end of it.
Right.
These are all corresponding points, and so basically what we have here, though, is this picture of a new Eden. That's going to get fleshed out even more in chapter 9, because we're going to see a vineyard get planted there on top of the mountain. Noah is going to be set up kind of like the cherubim in some ways, or kind of like the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So Noah is going to be given the authority to judge good and evil, right, in the covenant. That he tells him that he's going to have the ability to bear the sword. Right. And so that's going to be a part of that. And then, you're going to come back down the mountain again, and you're going to have his shame covered, all that, like with the fig tree. But anyway, But yeah, basically what's going on here though is we have a new Eden, we have a new holy mountain, and it's teeming with life now. Right? The animals are swarming now on this, just like they would of the cosmic mountain of Eden. So that's what's going on.
So this is going to be like we said before we came on, this is going to be a shorter episode this week. Main reason for that, this is kind of a transitional passage.
Yeah.
It's taking us from the end of the flood to the covenant. Next week will not be a shorter episode.
Yeah.
Because we're going to start hitting the Noahic covenant next week. Mm-hmm. We're going to look at the altar that Noah builds and the offering that he makes to God, and then the covenant that God makes with Noah. So it's going to be a bit of a heavier passage next week. There's going to be a lot more to it. This passage, like we said, with it being the back end of a chiasm, it's basically the reverse of what we already said. So it's saying the same things we said in the last couple weeks.
It would be awesome if you were able to preach the entire chiasm together. But if you're going to do that, you're going to preach 3 chapters in one sermon, and that's just not feasible.
And Derek would be very upset with you if you came in and told him he had to read 3 chapters before service started.
He would be highly upset, so I wouldn't blame him.
Right.
But yeah, so that's, this seems repetitious, but it's repetitious for a reason.
Right.
And it's leading us up to something new next week that we've not yet seen. So.
Right. You had like the scene from Monty Python, where the repetition is used for memorization.
That's exactly right.
And that's what this is.
Yep.
This is repetition used for memorization. Yep. Moses is intentionally repeating himself so that as you're reading it, you're reading the same thing over and over and over, and by the time you finish reading it, it's kind of drilled into your head.
Yeah,
You've memorized it at this point.
It's a literary device used to help with memory. If you can get the patterns in your head, these chiastic structures, then you can remember an entire story just because of the shape of the passage.
Right.
And we see this with people in our church too, like where they can get some of these chiastic, and they're able to tell a whole story.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's what the purpose of this is. So.
Yeah. So I don't have much to add to what we've talked about today. If you all have any questions about it, if you have any questions about anything here in the flood story, feel free to get those questions to us. You can comment them here on the video, either on Facebook or YouTube. You can send us a message through Facebook Messenger at New Haven Church. You can go to our website, newhavenwv.com, click the Resources tab at the top of the page, and then click Talks at New Haven. There's a form there where you can submit an email. Or you can go to our Instagram page, at Talks at New Haven, and you can send us messages from there. We'd love to try to answer any kind of questions that you have, and we'll do our best to answer those as biblically sound as we can. Mm-hmm. So that's all that I've got for you this week. If you are good to go,
I'm good to go.
We will see you guys next week.
See you then.